so this whole view of rationality was in fact confusing trauma with nature.
Have attacks on rationality gone too far and undermined our ability to test our assertions? Kathleen.
Thank you. So, as a good philosopher, I think I should start by defining my terms. So by rationality, I'm going to understand it as a set of methods that humans use to achieve goals. And then you can subdivide that into theoretical rationality, which is methods we use to find knowledge or truth, and then maybe practical rationality, which is more oriented towards action. So there's always been attacks on rationality within philosophy and psychology in all sorts of places. That's not new. You can think about David Hume in the 18th century saying that you can't reason about your goals, you can only reason about the means to get to your goals, but your desires are completely irrational. Or you could think about the attacks in philosophy of science in the 20th century. There was a huge revolution in how people started to think about science. It's not just that the scientist looks at the data neutrally, has a hypothesis, tests against the data, and then sees whether it's true or not. It's much more complicated, and in fact, what you expect to see infects what you see, so the data is not neutral of your background theory. So that's an attack on rationality too. And there's feminist attacks on rationality, that the idea that it's been traditionally constructed as male and females have been constructed as irrational and emotional, where emotion is being set up as something against reason. So all of that has been going on for ages, but I don't really think that that's the problem now. I'd love to think that people listen to philosophers, but I don't think they do. And I think that there's something else going on. So I will just say three things about what I think is going on before I run out of time. One is that, quite obviously, social media is altering the way that people relate to one another, and its bad thinking is contagious. So we all have cognitive blind spots, and I'm sure that's going to come up in discussion, but the cognitive blind spots are being preyed upon by the algorithms and encouraged. Emotion is also a thing that gets you clicks very fast in social media, and so that's exacerbating the problem because people are not thinking coolly. We're also being siloed into spaces, as I'm sure you all know, where we aren't exposed to testing for our own points of view. So it's easy to get confirmation bias there, for instance. So that's the first thing. Second thing I think is connected to that. I think that as we get sort of more affluent generally in society, a certain class of people can afford to be detached from reality, and they can afford to be irrational. And in fact, they can afford to have what have been called luxury beliefs, because they get certain kinds of status by parading online their beliefs in arcane theories that have no empirical justification whatsoever, or they get status for moralizing reality, as it were, and setting up a dichotomy where the good people have these irrational beliefs and the bad people, the ones that keep going on about reality, are really fascists. So that's not helping. And the third thing is the institutions are collapsing. So the institutions in which we would have thought would have preserved robust debate, standards of justification, scientific methodology, they are being captured partly because of the luxury belief element, but they are being captured by ideology. And also, the law, for instance, if you take the institution of the law, it's just there's not enough funding there. So the law is a place where you would expect rationality to exist, but in fact, the decisions are often quite arbitrary. So people are losing faith in our institutions, academia, the law, medicine, and science, because they don't seem to be operating in the way that we think they should. So those are my three diagnoses.
Thank you very much for that opener. I'm going to put this to you now, Michael, if you could. Have attacks on rationality gone too far and undermined our ability to test assertions? 3 minutes.
Yeah, interesting. So, they've gone too far in a sense that what we just want to know is what's true. What should we believe? Justified true belief. What constitutes justification? The problem is everybody thinks they have justification for what they believe. So everyone uses rationality and reason to justify whatever it is they believe politically or ideologically or conspiratorially or whatever. I'm fond of saying no one in the history of the world has ever joined a cult. They join a group that they think is going to be good. It's going to save the world, help the poor, improve their memory, whatever. And then, down the line, they end up finding out it wasn't what they thought it was. But at the time, they thought it was perfectly rational. In Skeptic Magazine, this is my day job, we debunk pseudoscience, but the problem is no one in the history of the world has ever identified as a pseudoscientist. I'm going down to my pseudo lab to collect some pseudo facts to support my pseudo theory that I know is a bunch of baloney. So everybody thinks they have evidence. I've talked to flat earthers, they have arguments. And you have to know what they are to counter them. Or creationists, they have arguments. Holocaust deniers, they have their reasons why they believe what they believe. Sorry. And so the question is then, what constitutes reasonable rationality? And has your claim been tested? Has it been challenged by other people? What is it exactly you're claiming, and what is it exactly you're claiming is the evidence for it? And so on. So we're all in the rationality game. It's just the question is, what's the quality of that, of the arguments? And so when I engage in these kind of debates with people, it's not enough to just counter with better facts, because it's often not the facts that are really under debate. It's something underlying it. So take something like the QAnon conspiracy theory that Hillary Clinton was running a pedophile ring out of a pizzeria in Washington, D.C. Yes, this was actually true. Belief.
I'm glad you clarified that.
Did people actually believe this? Well, one guy did, Edgar Welch. He went there with an AR-15 rifle to break up the pedophile ring because no one was doing anything about this crime. Right? But most people, I think, if you really press them, would say, well, probably not. Or if you took them there and said, look, not only is there's not even a basement here where it's going on, right? They're just eating pizza. They probably would not say, well, in that case, I'm going to vote for Hillary. They were never going to vote for Hillary. This is a stand-in, a proxy for something else. Like, I just don't trust those Democrats. The libtards are up to no good. Maybe they're not running a pedophile ring, but they're doing something bad. So I call this proxy conspiracism. It's a stand-in for something else. The facts by themselves won't change it. You can talk to a climate denier all you want and give them CO2 gas numbers and the shrinking of the glaciers. None of that matters because they've bundled that belief with a particular political position. So they don't want to change. And most people don't have the facts anyway. How would you fact check things? Most of us don't know how to do it. If you ask people, students, do you believe in evolution? Most of them go, yeah, of course. And you ask them to explain it, how does it work, natural selection? They don't really know. So they're publicly signaling, yeah, I kind of trust science, or I don't trust the science, regardless of the facts.
Okay. Thank you very much, Michael. Carol, over to you. Have attacks on rationality gone too far and undermined our ability to test assertions? In 3 minutes.
Well, Kathleen said that people don't listen to philosophers. I don't know, do people listen to psychologists? Because that's where I'm coming from. And where I came into the debate on rationality was that men were seen to be rational and humans were considered to be rational. There's that famous line from Gulliver's Travels, which is, reason is sufficient to govern a rational creature. And at that time, women were seen to be irrational, which meant that women were considered to be emotional. And that was the contrast, that either you were rational or you were emotional, and it was highly gendered. Freud said that women have less sense of justice than men because women's judgments are affected by emotions and relationships. And that was across the field of psychology. Lawrence Kohlberg, who developed his 6 stages of moral reasoning about, on the basis of his studies of boys and men, the women never reached his highest stages because women were considered to be too emotional. And Piaget said that in his moral judgment of the child, which meant boys, that girls were an exception to the child because girls cared more about relationships than rules. So you see what that was about. So it was in this context that in the 1970s, I was interested in how people think about real dilemmas of conflict and choice. When the roads divide and you have to decide which way am I going to go. And I was interested in who is the I in that question. And does moral language come in thinking about, is there a right way to go, that kind of thing. That's where my work intersected with my philosophy colleagues. Anyway, so I started listening to women and discovered two things. One is no one had listened to women. That was extraordinary from a psychologist's point of view, because we are half the population. So that was interesting. And secondly, what I heard was a different, and that was the title of my book, a different voice, a different way of speaking about self and about morality. A different way of speaking about self, because the assumption was that we live embedded in a network of relationships. We're not these separate atom people. And in morality, that thinking about what to do or what I should do joined reason with emotion. That you had to think about how people would be affected, who was involved, and the whole kind of relational narrative context in which this decision arose. So I wrote a book called In a Different Voice, meaning a voice that joined reason with emotion. Okay, that was in the 1970s, 1980s. In the 1990s, neuroscientists came to my aid in the work of Antonio Damasio, who wrote a book called Descartes' Error. And the error was the separation of reason from emotion. And Damasio, a neurobiologist, in his studies of neurobiological function, discovered that the separation of reason from emotion, rather than being the apogee of cognitive development, the achievement of rationality, which is how it was seen by psychologists, was in fact a manifestation of injury or trauma. So this whole view of rationality was in fact confusing trauma with nature. And that really changed my view. My different voice then was a voice that had not been truncated, I would say, by trauma, that still joined. And the second book of Damasio's, which is actually my favorite, called The Feeling of What Happens, based on the line from Seamus Heaney's poem, The Music of What Happens. And the subtitle is Body and Emotion in the Making of Consciousness. And the basic, the gist of it is, I think we all know this, that it's in our bodies and in our emotions that we register our experience from moment to moment. Like a film running continually inside us, and also the awareness of watching the film. And in other words, we register our experience in our bodies and in our emotions, which then plays out in our minds and our thoughts. So if we separate our minds from our bodies and our thoughts from our emotions, we lose touch with the voice of experience. And we become, you could say, lost in thought, or we become, to pick up on what Michael said, captive to false authority, because we lose that grounding in what we know on the basis of experience. So then my different voice, which was gendered feminine when rationality was gendered masculine, became a human voice, a voice of a human being who had not been injured or traumatized.
Thank you very much. Let's delve into our themes now. Michael, I want to kick off with you.